This is my first Zoom call of the day, which is highly unusual. Kenneth
Well,
and I
good
Zooming
evening.
all day, every day.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kenneth Hoffman. I'm the director of the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, soon to open here in New Orleans, Louisiana. I happen to be in the beautiful library of Temple Sinai, who are graciously letting us use their office space. So thank you to Temple Sinai. And I'm very excited for this program tonight. It's a continuation of our Growing Up Jewish In series. Last month, we spoke with Deborah Lammensdorf-Jacobs about growing up Jewish in the Mississippi Delta. And tonight, we're moving one state over to Alabama, the great state of Alabama, to talk to Rusty Palmer about growing up Jewish in Selma, Alabama. So this program is being recorded, and in the next couple of days, we will put it up on our YouTube channel so that if you have friends that didn't get a chance to join, they'll be able to see it there. And you can also rewatch it if you wish. So I got more people in the waiting room, so let me let those people in. All right. Now, so let's go ahead and introduce Rusty. Rusty, why don't you say hello to the crowd?
Hi, everybody. I am a true and true son of Selma, Alabama. And you can take the boy out of Selma, but you can never get the Selma out of the boy, that's for sure. I lived there for 18 years. Kenneth, you want to hear a short bio?
Yeah, give it to us.
Went to Tulane after that, like all of my siblings did, starting with David Barton in med school, and my sister moving from Smith there, and my older brother Eddie went there, my younger brother Buddy, Judy, his wife, Suzanne, my wife. We've got just about 20 degrees from Tulane. Then I went to University of Texas, got an MBA there, back to New Orleans, and lived in New Orleans in the real estate business for about 35 years before Katrina flooded our house on Audubon Boulevard, right by Tulane campus. We made a quick decision in about 2 hours, got an office, a house, furnished it in San Antonio, Texas, and I've been inside this house in San Antonio for the last 6 months. So here I am. We don't venture out a heck of a lot right now.
Very good. Well, and y'all may or may not know this, but Rusty is an important guy for the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. He is, not only is he on the board of directors, but he is one of the vice chairmen. So he, along with our chairman, Jay Tannenbaum, and our other vice chair, Morris Mintz, are really intimately involved in getting the museum open, in helping with the building renovation, checking up on the insurance and on the banking and on the exhibit design. There's so many things that go into making a museum. They probably didn't know all the things that went into it when they started working on this, but they're certainly learning. And we could not do this. We could not open this museum without our board, and particularly without Rusty, Morris, and Jay. So thanks to them. I'm going to share, I'm going to be going back and forth, but I'm going to share my screen, which has a PowerPoint with some images that we will talk about as we go through the evening. So you can see here is the name of our program. Can everybody see can y'all see it? Yeah, shaking your head? Good. All right, so Growing Up Jewish in Selma, a conversation with Rusty Palmer, Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience. There is our website at the bottom, very easy, MSJE.org. If you want to know more about the museum, you can go there, tell you all about it. Now, let's see here. Now, I said that Rusty was hands-on, and when I say that, I mean that. So here are some pictures. Here's a picture of Rusty and Jay in our building. This is when the renovation was just getting started about a year ago. And on the right is Rusty with our curator, Anna Tucker, in the back parking lot. If you know anything about downtown New Orleans, you know that to have a parking lot is a big deal. So we do have some parking, and it looks a lot better than it looks in that picture. Now, where is Selma? Anybody know where Selma is? Well, I put a circle around it to show you where Selma is, but I'm going to let Rusty talk a little bit about some of the early history of Selma. Take it away, Rusty.
Thank you, Kenneth. I'm excited to tell you a bit about Selma. I don't know all of it firsthand, but I'm going to tell you a little summary about the early days. So actually, right outside of Selma, a town named Cahaba, exactly 200 years ago, was the first state capital of Alabama. Cahaba flooded and then it burned, then it had a disease like a malaria or something, and finally they just gave up on it. And the folks moved to Selma, the capital moved to Tuscaloosa, and then to Montgomery. But the capital was located in Cahaba because of the Cahaba River and the Alabama River. And Selma, of course, is right on the Alabama River. So Selma was actually founded, Cahaba was the capital in 1820, and Selma was actually founded in 1830. And believe it or not, the first member of our family got to Selma in 1828. So that was a guy named Joseph. So he was there, my family was there from the very beginning of Selma, for better or for worse. So Joseph came over from Paris, went back and forth a few times, married a girl who also was born in Paris but lived in Mobile, named Rachel Tarkin, and then they moved to Selma, and they had at least 2 children, one of whom was Leonce, I think that's how you pronounce it, and he fought in the Civil War. He was captured. He was not killed in the Civil War, but he was captured, and then his sister, Mathilde Joseph, married actually, she was my great grandmother, married my great grandfather. I think that's right. It's a little tricky to get this exactly right. But so she was in Selma during the Civil War, and Selma was an important place at that time because of the shipping on the river and the farming that took place around it, the Black Belt region, because of the black soil. And as you know, cotton was the money crop then. So cotton was grown around there, which, has all the other implications, the slavery and the plantations and all that existed in Central and South Alabama. And because of that, Selma became an important place, and all these farmers came to Selma to bring their crops to the river to ship up and down. And Selma actually became, because they would supply the farmers with all this machinery, during the Civil War, they converted the factories to munitions plants. So Selma became a very important place during the Civil War, and it was second to Richmond in actually supplying ammunition, guns, cannons, and so to win the Civil War, the Union troops had to attack Selma. So in 1864, the Union Army, rolled into Selma and blew up the munition plants. And there are lots of stories about houses with cannonballs shot through them, and the locals hiding their jewelry under the floorboards, and a lot of Selma lore about that. But so I had family there, and some of the others in my family were born at that time. You see some of the Civil War vintage folks here. One of these guys you'll recognize.
Well, right, Rusty. So exactly, I was going to say thank you for that overview of the early years. When a lot of people, if they're not from Selma or the area, when they think of Selma, they think of the Civil Rights Movement and the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But most people maybe don't know who Edmund Pettus was, but here is Edmund Pettus, who was a who was an officer in the Confederacy. After the Civil War, was in the Alabama state legislature. I can't remember if he actually went up to Washington to represent Alabama. And the other picture, the other gentleman, Benjamin Sterling Turner, was Alabama's first African-American elected politician in 1870.
And he was born a slave.
That's right, born a slave. And during Reconstruction. So like a lot of the South, a lot of Selma history is of black and white, of racial issues. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but the idea of the museum and the idea of tonight's program is that there is more to the South than the story of just black and white. The South has more diversity maybe than most people know, although the people on this program certainly have an inkling that there is more to it. And that's why I want to just start out with this newspaper notice. It's from 1851. So this is 10 years for the Civil War. And it's from a non-Jewish dry goods store, Walker and Pettit. And they're advertising in the Jacksonville Republican, which is not too far from Selma. And they say these goods were purchased with great care and entirely for cash, which will enable them to sell as low or a little lower than the Jews or any other good house in Benton County. So that tells you right there that in 1851, there were Jewish merchants in the area selling, and they were some of the low-cost sellers in the area because people had to compete against the Jewish merchants for their customers. So I love this ad, and then that brings me to these, and I'm going to let Rusty take over here from these ads during the Reconstruction period and after, well, right at the end of Reconstruction and after. And these are well, tell everybody what these are, Rusty.
Well, I mean, this really blows me away, Kenneth, and I give you credit for finding this. Kenneth's got a magic touch on digging stuff up. You see Abraham Kaiser, who was my great grandfather, and you see another store that's owned by Mark Sleva, who now those are the two sides of my mother's family. My mother was Hannah Leva Kaiser. And so this tells me several things. First of all, 1876, you're talking 10 years after Selma was invaded by the Yankees and blown up, 10 years after the Civil War was over, and you have 18 Jewish stores that are in business in downtown Selma. And that had to be all of downtown. First of all, you know, my first message that it tells me is, you know, that Jews came to the States, you know, to get away from the persecution in Russia or Germany and virtually every country, but they also came seeking opportunity. And there was opportunity in the States, and there was a lot of opportunity in the South. Everybody in the South, these farmers, needed stuff. And the Jews were smart enough to be the guys that wanted to supply the stuff. Selma, being a prosperous farming area, was a great place to have a business. So,
and Rusty, let me ask you this: what else does this tell you about? Were they hiding being Jewish?
Well, you're right. I mean, it tells you they're right up front. They're just letting the town know when they're open and when they're closed.
And being closed in September, what do you think that was all about?
Well, that's holidays.
That's right. I mean, especially in the second one, in the second notice, you'll see where they're closed on the 10th and then on the 19th. So there you go. You got Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur right there.
And Kenneth, you know, a more modern version of that story is when my grandfather, not my great-grandfather, when my grandfather and my dad and my younger brother Buddy were running Kaiser's, which they all did, and my mom did for a while. We had to be open on Saturdays. And I know that every southern city and everybody who had a store did the same thing. In our case, all these folks who were out in the country making their money on cotton or whatever it was, I mean, their day to come into town to buy their stuff was on Saturday. And believe me, we were going to be open on Saturday to sell it, to do our business. So we closed the stores on Wednesday afternoons and Sunday, not on Saturday.
And tell me what your dad would do. Just, I know we're skipping ahead, but what would your dad do on Wednesday afternoons?
Well, he would go fishing.
There you go.
And when he would go fishing, he'd find a little pond somewhere, and lots of us would go with him. All of us did at one time or another. And that kind of fishing was with a cane pole and a hook with red worms on it. And we could catch enough fish in one afternoon. I mean, it was a sure thing. We'd catch so many fish, and you fry them in cornmeal. Jews like to talk about food. You'd fry them up in cornmeal, and there was enough for each of us to eat as many fish as we wanted. There were 4 siblings in my family. We all ate a lot, and all our friends came by. So, this was one of our meals. I have more food to talk about, but yeah, my dad would catch a lot of fish for us on Wednesdays and Sunday mornings.
Excellent. All right. So now let's so since we started talking about the Jews showing up in town as merchants, and they are observing the holidays and closing, but there actually is an institutional, a congregational life starting here, because in June of 1879, the first Mishkan Israel is founded, and this is in the paper.
I got a story here, Kenneth, and you're going to have to excuse me. There are a lot of stories that are involved here. The second to the last paragraph, I believe, the Reverend G.L. Rosenberger, who performed the service, I believe that's David Barton, my brother-in-law. I think that is his great-grandfather, who was the first rabbi in Selma. You can explain why they call him Reverend, but I think
that was just Reverend, Doctor of Divinity. Sometimes they were called rabbis back then, but it was just as often they were called reverends.
Well, this guy, actually, David's great-grandfather officiated at the marriage of Lynn and Eddie and Buddy and my great-grandmother to my great-grandfather. So David's great-grandparents married my great-grandparents in 1874, which I'll show you something about that.
Well, that brings us to some actual pictures of your family. So tell us about the two sides of the one side of your family.
So, as you know, my mom, her mother was a Leva, and that is her mother on the left, top row with the red circle. Beautiful lady. That's her parents sitting in front of her, Marx and Johanna. And my Aunt Till is in there. And there's, no, I'm sorry, that's one generation more. She's my mother's generation. So that's my grandmother, and my grandfather is on the Kaiser side. He's the guy with the red circle, Ed Kaiser. And so they marry, and, they become prominent citizens of Selma. I do think it's interesting how Levas, apparently they had more money than the Kaisers around this time. They're dressed a lot better. Yeah. And, some of the stories that I've got are kind of my family lore, just hand-me-down stories, and some you can trace back. The Levas not only were in retail, they had a liquor business, and Jews made a lot of money in the liquor business. And but the retail business, was good then also. Now, the young man in the Kaiser photograph there, he dropped out of school at age 13, Pa, Edwin Kaiser did, and he had to help the family earn some money, and he did that by helping his mother run the boarding house, and as a stenographer and as a dance instructor before he and his brother started Kaiser's department store.
And weren't you telling me, Rusty, that some of the differences in maybe social standing may have had something to do with when folks came over or from where they came over?
Well, very much so. And tell you what, let me save that story to a little later, because my dad, who was not in any of these pictures, his family came over from Russia to the Northeast before he got to Selma. So that's where you get the Eastern Jews and the Western European Jews. And I'll give you a little of that story,
All right.
a few
Well,
pictures down.
tell us about the, you sent me you sent me this picture, and what's going on here? What is this?
That's a prized possession, Kenneth. I'm looking at that in my dining room right now. That was a wedding gift to my great-grandparents. It is a fork and carving knife set. It's ivory handles with the date of April 6, 1874 carved into them, and the names of my grandparents. We've actually got it labeled wrong, Leva Kaiser. It's actually Joseph Kaiser. It was a generation before that. So that 1874 date, again, 10 years after the Civil War, and this had to be, just an astonishingly fine piece to give somebody as a wedding gift for a young couple. And so there had to be some real commerce going on and some money getting made, in Selma, Alabama at that time. And if you go to Selma, Alabama, even today, one thing you will see is the most extraordinary stock of buildings, houses. Some of our family homes are just spectacular, that are in Selma that were built to a large degree between 1860 and 1900.
Well, tell me, Rusty, did you ever use, like growing up, did your family ever use this, or has it always been just displayed?
My mom, these came through my mom and her sister's side of the family. And, we all were pretty family conscious all the way through. My mom and dad and grandparents, we're a close group. And I think you saw in the previous picture, there were 7 Leva kids and there were 7 Kaiser kids in this photo.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of aunts and uncles and cousins and nephews. So there were a lot of it. So it was Selma was a family place. When Selma was going strong, it was about 28,000 people. There were 300 or 400 Jewish families there. It doesn't seem like a lot, but we had, in Selma, we had our friends and our family and our life. And we were real parts of the Selma community.
Well, speaking of that, let's move closer to the present. We're not there yet, but what's going on? Who is this fella?
Well, this fellow was Ed Kaiser, Pa, and he was the little guy in the white shirt who dropped out of school when he was 13. He was a super business person. He was the patriarch of my family, and he was the brains behind the store. He was just a great civic citizen of Selma. He was a founder of the Country Club, one of the founders of People's Bank. He built our store. I say it with pride. We were one of 2 department stores. We were the high-end store. If you wanted something nice, you go to Kaiser's to buy it. And we're going to talk some about the temple, but in truth, the store was the rhythm of our family. It was, we all had to be in Selma over winter break, whether we were living elsewhere or not, because you couldn't close the store. So if you wanted to be with the family, that's where you had to be. And, the Wednesdays and the Sundays off, and everybody in Selma dropped into Kaiser to see either my grandfather or my dad or, one of the others. So they would either, we met at my grandfather's house for Sunday dinner every week, but in my house, when my dad came home for dinner, it would, we didn't have an internet, and we didn't even have much TV, but we got the news because everybody came into the store and talked. And that's, that was the town meeting center. It was on Broad Street in those 18 Jewish stores. And, and of course, with me and my 4 siblings, everybody's family in town knew us, and they all knew my folks. So we knew it all. We had a finger on everything going on.
All right. Now we're really getting close.
Really close to home here. That's my dad, Seymour, my mom, Hannah. And, So I guess I will digress now to what you'd mentioned before, Kenneth. So my dad, his parents were first generation Russian. They came through Ellis Island. My dad was born in Fall River, Massachusetts, and what that implies is my grandparents on his side were working in the mills because that's where you made the cloth really out of the cotton that was shipped, down the Mississippi and the Alabama and shipped up north and where the cloth was made. So probably, they were in that business there. But my dad, his parents moved to Manhattan. They had drugstores. My dad went to Michigan and then to Columbia Law School, had to drop out with the Depression. And so my grandfather, my mom was dating a Christian guy, Marvin Melson in Selma. That was not well received. My dad shipped my mother up to New York and said, go meet a Jewish guy. Met my dad on a blind date, and they were married in 90 days and heading back to Selma. So that was around late 30s, early 40s. This photo is my parents' 25th wedding anniversary that my older sibs, Lynn and Eddie, kind of planned a surprise for them. They had no idea. And this is really their personalities exhibited here. My dad had his mouth open. He was either talking or putting food into it. My mom would be in the background. She was the quiet Southern belle, and she was a steel magnolia and was the ladylike strength. And
well, it says here she was a gracious lady here in the newspaper, and if for those who can't read what it says down below, it's that she was a member of the temple. She was a past president of the Council of Jewish Women. She was active in the PTA and the Red Cross, the Girl Scouts, and various fund drives. So she seemed like she was really not only part of the religious community, but part of the overall civic community of Selma.
Well, she was, and never a nicer lady. And she would for sure drag us as little kids to see all the aunts and uncles and all the cousins, and do what we were supposed to do. Usually had to wear shoes to do it, and, wash her face and act upright, which was not easy. But she made sure that we did what we were supposed to. But she was a sweetheart, and she was the strength.
And speaking of civic involvement, so here again is your dad with a newspaper article about him being chosen to be president of the Kiwanis Club, and a lovely plaque here from the community honoring him.
Of course, I have the plaque in my house now, but the big message here, Kenneth, and this wasn't unusual, but the Jews were not just merchants running stores. They were leaders of the community, and they built these communities. Selma, obviously, if they built downtown Selma in the 1860s and 70s, but they were 3 Jewish mayors in Selma. As you see here, my dad was president of Kiwanis Club. He was president of the YMCA at one time, basically the United Way. He was president of that. And we were kind of all raised to, do the right thing. And,
absolutely. Here's some other community leaders. Here's your buddy Mike Siegel, who you work with or used to work with. Maybe you still do.
Well, there's his dad. That's his dad on the left, Schuster Siegel.
Right. Exactly.
And, Harry Maring, and these are a couple of prominent Jewish families in Selma.
And I clipped this just because it says the fund benefits non-sectarian hospitals treating cancer, tuberculosis, and arthritis patients, and other similar humanitarian facilities. And then to send your contributions to the Selma Jewish Welfare Fund. And what they're funding, they're not funding the synagogue here, they're funding the hospital, for everybody. So this what you were talking about.
And let me say about Mike on the right. So Mike was my brother's roommate at Tulane for 4 years. We, of course, they're 7 years younger than me, but so Mike and Betty were at Tulane. After Tulane, Mike said to me, he said, my dad thinks I ought to be a banker. And I said, Mike, why don't you come work for me? Which he did. And then we became partners and have been partners corporate realty in New Orleans for about 30 years. And probably between the two of us, we've done more real estate deals, commercial real estate deals in New Orleans than most other companies in town combined, probably. So we've had a lot of success there, and just a couple of Selma boys. And Mike is involved in a lot of things as well. He's on the board of Country Day and New Orleans Museum of Art and the CAC. So, you kind of take these lessons with you.
Absolutely. Well, we have finally gotten up to you, but we're doing it in a very Jewish way because for those of you on the call who aren't Jewish, there's a tradition that you name a child after a deceased relative. And so tell us what we're looking at here, Rusty.
Well, so my dad, who grew up in New York before he moved to Selma, had one sibling, and that was Uncle Russ. Uncle Russ fought in World War II. He was shot down. He was a pilot. He was shot down on a bombing mission out of Anzio, Italy. So Suzanne and I went to Italy last year. Lynn had done this before me, but we went to see Uncle Russ, who was shot down and died 5 years to the day before I was born.
And so you are named after Uncle Russ.
I am
That's
indeed.
beautiful. That's beautiful. And this is a beautiful picture. And you can see that if you've never been to a U.S. military cemetery before, it's mostly crosses, but you will also see the Star of David throughout.
And let me assure you that these folks take great care of these military cemeteries. Let me also add that Kenneth, who's talking to you, was the education director at the World War II Museum in New Orleans, which is fabulous, for 18 years before we lured him away for the Southern Jewish Museum.
Absolutely. All right, so now it's your story. So take it away.
So the good-looking guy in the red circle is me, myself, and the other circle on the first row, Julie Lilienthal. I know Julie's on the call. I saw her a minute ago. And Julie had her tongue out here, and that's because she was kind of cutting up and making fun. But it could be because her mouth was moving. She got me in a lot of trouble in these early days. So this is the first grade at Bird School. You'll notice some kids in the photo without shoes. We didn't wear shoes till they made us, and that was in the 7th grade. So this is kind of a ragtag group of friends. And there's my best friend on the top row with me there in the blue jean jacket, Jesse. And he and I were running mates for many, many years. So, and as is Julie, who married my fraternity brother Harold and lives in Birmingham. And this is prime time. We didn't wear shoes, but we often in the summer didn't wear shirts, or we wore as little as possible. It was hot in Selma. So there I am on the left with my first cousin, Chuck Kahn, whose mom is my mom's sister.
Good to see you.
Chuck's looking good there. Chuck now
Usually
lives in
earlier
New
was
York.
accepted by the South.
Hold on, Peter. Peter, you need to mute yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So Chuck was with Sanford Bernstein on the board for about 30 years. He lived Central Park West in New York. And we stay in close touch. And on the right, you see the Sibs. That's me on the top. Edwin Kaiser Palmer on the left there, my older brother. Lynn's on the right. And Buddy Ralph was the baby of the family. He was named after Ralph Kaiser and, of course, Edwin Kaiser. And so Eddie is an attorney in Atlanta. You'll see later on, we've got a picture of John Lewis. Interestingly, he represents now, or he represented John and Lillian Lewis in Atlanta in his legal practice. He was a teacher at Georgia State for many years. Lynn's on the right. She and her husband, David, live in Nashville. And David's a psychiatrist, Lynn's a therapist doing marriage counseling, and I'm going to show you some things they've done a little later. My younger brother, Buddy, all these folks went to Tulane. Buddy's now in Birmingham. None of us live in Selma, but Buddy runs an arts organization that does a lot of things. They They're responsible for all of the movies that are made in Birmingham. Buddy was responsible for getting the Alabama tax credit deal in place.
I'll blow it off in a couple of minutes.
Did you do that, Buddy? Maybe they don't give you too much credit. He also works in a lot of startup businesses with an organization called Create Birmingham. So now all of us Selma folks, I'm in San Antonio, Eddie Atlanta, Buddy Birmingham, Lynn Nashville, and our kids, who you'll see a bit of later, they're scattered around too. Not many of the family, after all these family went through Selma, not many left.
All right. Well, now I want everyone to, except for Rusty, I want everyone to mute yourselves because we can hear dogs barking and side conversations. So if you just please mute yourself, that would be appreciated. And let's talk a little bit about Jewish life, and both Jewish life and non-Jewish life, and how maybe sometimes they would intersect.
Okay. Well, you see, Julie and I and Gail, my other cousin and good buddy, are at our confirmation. So we had a Jewish life in Selma. The temple that was constructed there at the end of the 1800s is magnificent. You'll see more of that. We went to temple on Friday night. We always had Sunday school. We had rabbis until the Jewish population didn't support it, and observed all of the holidays, and so we had a Jewish life, but we were also very much incorporated into the city. On the right, you see me at my first summer job at the YMCA.
All right.
So the YMCA camp was where we didn't go to Jewish camps, but Camp Grist, was just outside of Selma, but it was beautiful country. It was in a Christian camp, and we sang the Christian songs, and we did all the Christian stuff. But all of our friends were, I never frankly felt. I frankly didn't feel any anti-Semitism in Selma. I started to say hardly any. Certainly there was some, and others had experiences. We were clearly Jewish, and we were clearly part of the overall community, and felt accepted, completely.
So, Rusty, as I started looking at in the newspaper for the words Rusty and Palmer in Selma, all of these sports stories started popping up. So you were quite the athlete in Selma, in junior high, in high school. Tell us a little bit about that.
I was the family jock, me and my mother. My mother played basketball in Northwestern University. She was captain of her high school team, so she was a jock. I was the quarterback of the football team, the captain of the basketball team, the shortstop of the baseball team, and I taught tennis in the summer. So I was a busy guy. So I wasn't in temple every Friday night, nor was my dad, because if there was a ball game, he was at it, and I was usually playing it.
Well, I think our board chair Jay Tannenbaum is on the line, and he loves to say that for Southern Jews, Friday Night Lights sometimes means something different. Sometimes it could mean the high school football game. Sometimes it could mean the lighting of the Shabbos lights. So that's a great way to think about at least one aspect of the Southern Jewish experience. Now you went on.
Well, let me say one thing here. Other than Joel Leffelholtz, who I see on the screen here, I am probably the only short, white, Jewish guy that can dunk a basketball. So there are not many of us out there.
Wow. Awesome.
Can you even touch the rim today?
Today, I'm lucky to touch the ground, Joel.
We played a lot of basketball together here.
Yes, we did.
Well, here's a great picture of you stealing the ball from Bowman, and then you go off to Tulane, and certainly between your freshman year and your senior year, you lose the tie, the hair gets a little longer, quite the looker.
Well, I went from a conservative jock from Selma, to a college activist. So
It happens.
I was moving from the Selma to Montgomery March in '65 to the Vietnam protests between '67 and '71, and I was involved. And you know, and I will admit to one mistake that I made in public. This isn't the only mistake I made. You can ask Suzanne; she'll tell you. But I made one bad mistake during that time, and that was, I was caught up in the anti-Vietnam activism, and I would argue with my dad about that, and that was wrong. He was very patriotic, and he lost his brother, and it chokes me up. But so I did make that mistake. Other than that,
Yeah.
I loved my college career when I left Selma, and I know you were just about to show
Oh yeah. I'm going to show a picture.
Tulane years.
First of all, it's a great picture, but the story behind it is even greater. So lay it on us, Rusty.
Well, coming from Selma, I truly did not have any peer Black friends. I knew Black folks from people that worked in the store, people that worked in our house, and but Selma was completely segregated when I was there. Tulane was just on the verge of integrating. So my basketball team at Tulane, when I was a freshman, had the very first Black athlete that was accepted at Tulane. I don't know that you have to put a circle around him there, Kenneth, but Harold Sylvester, I was truly his first white friend. He grew up in the projects in Tulane and in New Orleans, I'm sorry. And Harold was a bright guy, turned down an academic scholarship to Harvard to take this athletic scholarship at Tulane. Harold and I became best friends, still are. And of course, he was the star of the team at that time, and I rode the bench. But what I discovered was, it really didn't matter where you were from or what color you were, or what religion you were. If you put kids together and you give them a common goal, and maybe you put them on a team, they're going to work together. And I mean, the sports in my life created a real, team kind of mentality.
And you and Harold went on to work on a project together. Is that right?
Well, we did. Let me tell one story before this, and that is that Harold and I had numerous situations where we had to stick up for each other. One was right before the LSU game. The star of LSU at that time was a Jewish kid. We had a coach, Tom Nasalka, who was anti-Semitic apparently, and he said he would never.
He was.
He said he would never allow a Jewish player to beat him at anything. And Harold had the guts to stand up and acknowledge that I was in the room, and said, "Well, Coach, I wonder if you've ever had a Black person beat you." Well, I appreciate Harold standing up for me, and I had numerous situations where Harold got thrown out of places where we would be together, and those kind of things create bonds when you're young. But it is unusual that coming from Selma with the segregated history, and here one of my best friends is African American, and to this day we remain friends. And
so give us a quick little background on this movie and what it was all about.
We've had a lot of projects together. Harold's in the movie business, and we created this script about the first integrated basketball game or sporting event in Louisiana, where the Black schools couldn't play the white schools, and they had to have a game conducted in private that nobody could attend between these two undefeated teams. It was a true story where Harold was the star of the team, the Black team. Another one of our Tulane teammates was the star of the white team. And I heard the story and I said, Harold, let's create this into a movie. Well, we did. It was purchased by Disney. The executive producers, Andre Brower, the executive producers, were Magic Johnson and Quincy Jones. Harold was the screenwriter. I was a consultant. And we made some money, and we had a great time. So we made several movies together, but this was
that's fantastic. And those schools were St. Augustine, and Jesuit.
And Jesuit, yeah.
Two great schools still here in New Orleans.
And
All right, well, that's going to bring us,
wonderful.
since we've been talking about integration or segregation, and Selma, as we started out saying, is known around the world for the civil rights during the civil rights movement, the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge. So we have a historical photo here. We have a photo, a more recent photo, and I want to talk a little bit, or I want you to talk a little bit about the civil rights movement, what you remember about it, what it meant to you and your family.
Well, I was there. It was in 1965. I was, 10th grader in high school, 15, 16 years old. And so I remember it. And it was a very difficult time. Selma, as I mentioned, was a somewhat prosperous community, and it was a peaceful community, but not for everybody. And it was very segregated. But there was not a lot of, what you would consider, violence or protest. And Selma, to a degree, was pinpointed as a place for, what was, to enhance voting rights. And because blacks were allowed to vote at that time, but they were really discouraged. So you'd probably have in Selma probably 10 to 20% of the black community that was really voting. And, and there were a lot of racists in Selma. And there wasn't a lot of anti-Semitism, as I mentioned. But Selma had pretty much a racist sheriff at that time. What was his name? I've got that.
Jim Clark.
Jim Clark. And, and the story we heard was that that the black community knew about Jim Clark. They thought they could get under his skin. They thought that he would make a spectacle of himself, and they thought they could use Selma as an example. And that was right on the money. He really, did all those things. He, called, whatever racist buddies that he had, and state troopers, and it was ugly. My dad, frankly, who was educated and was, was outspoken. I mean, the way he portrayed it to us and me as a kid was that he understood that Selma needed to make changes, but he thought the changes needed to be more gradual. Well, maybe, but sometimes, changes don't come if they're too gradual. And I think that was the case here.
Well, and these photos I'm showing, these two rabbis that are pictured are not from the South. So
most of the people who were actively involved here, Kenneth, were not from Selma. Right. The Selma folks called them outside agitators. They were the Freedom Riders on the buses, and of course Dr. King and John Lewis and Rabbi Heschel and there were multiple rabbis and coming to Selma to do the right thing. And the Jewish citizens in Selma were a bit caught, between a rock and a hard place. I mean, we had businesses, we had friends, we were members of the community. We had our ethical beliefs and our religion, and and in the case of my family, we actually, again, my dad was somewhat of a spokesman, and his best friend at that time was the editor of the newspaper, and was writing editorials. We actually, we had death threats. We had FBI agents who'd follow our carpool to school. It was a scary time. We didn't know exactly what was going to happen, how bad it was going to get, but we knew it was not a good situation.
Well, it wasn't long after this that temples and rabbis' homes and Jewish leaders' homes were bombed, particularly in Mississippi, next door in Jackson and Meridian. But there were truly, a threatening atmosphere throughout. So I hear what you're saying.
And of course, you had the Birmingham church bombing and the temple in Atlanta, and it was a time, and this wasn't, several assassinations in the mid '60s with the Kennedys and Dr. King, and I mean, so it was a time of a lot of turbulence, and it certainly is true of Selma. This period was right in the middle of it.
For folks, when they come to the museum, we have an exhibit about Jews and Jewish activism in the South, and we spend a lot of time on the civil rights movement, and we have some wonderful oral histories from Southern rabbis, talking about their experiences during the civil rights movement. And there's not one story. There's all kinds of different stories, all kinds of different beliefs and actions they took. So I think that our visitors to the museum are really going to enjoy that. But now we're getting to the most important part, because we're going to talk about your lovely wife.
And Kenneth, I appreciate you saving my marriage by putting these photographs in here. So,
Who's the guy on the right?
On the left, you see my bride, who I met at Tulane, and I was, married way up, and we are with her grandmother, Sadie Menlovitz, who is first generation from Czechoslovakia, spoke with an accent, just like my New York grandparents, a lot of Yiddish. But so Sadie settled in Seguin. Menlovitz became Mandel, just like Palmer came from Perlmutter, which were my New York grandparents, Samuel and Francis Perlmutter. And so this is Sadie. And then on the right, you see Suzanne's family, her parents, Max and Roz, and her sisters, Jesse and Louise, and Gary's there. So, there's a point to this story. Besides the fact that my wife is such a babe, Suzanne grew up in Laredo. And Laredo is on the Rio Grande River, right on the border of Mexico. And so everybody spoke Spanish. There were several hundred Jews there. There was a temple. We were married in the temple. Her family was, practicing Jews. Her dad was a banker. But her family got to Laredo in the 1860s, the Alexander family. Imagine Laredo, Texas. I mean, it was Mexico. It was nothing but cowboys and ranchers and a little bit of distribution. And they finally put a railroad through there. So the point of having this in there is, it's really, Kenneth, what I kind of learned running with you as we, went to so many meetings and talked to so many folks. Everybody we talked to has got an interesting story. I mean, everybody. And all of these towns, I mean, every town in the South has got Jewish folks that live there that may have escaped the Nazis or, everybody's got a fascinating story. And Kenneth and I would tell our stories, and then they would say, and this happens over and over, can I tell you about my family? And then they lay a story on us that's like, I can't believe this. So, that's part of my motivation with the museum in New Orleans. These stories you'll see with Selma. Selma is not today the Selma that I've been talking about here, for the 200 years that it existed. It's a different place. You'll see all the Jews who've left Selma and have moved to Nashville, and Birmingham, Atlanta, and San Antonio, New Orleans. So Selma's not the same. Most of these towns have emptied out of Jews. Laredo, to a large degree, has as well. And they moved and enriched larger southern cities.
That's true. There are more, the small towns are disappearing or have disappeared, but there are more Jews in the South now than there ever have been. They just happen to be in Atlanta and Dallas and Birmingham.
But if people don't know about Selma and they don't know about Laredo, and you miss these stories, you're missing the folks that created our country.
Indeed. Well, let's look at some more folks. We're going to get through your family, and then we'll finish off just by talking briefly about the temple and the effort going on there?
Well, I'm going to run through this pretty quick because there are two important people there are a lot of important people on the left, but the circles, my mom and my wife. And then on the right, the circles are with, what would be the grandkids, a slew of them. And, Brent and Stephen were babies there, but Kirk and Amy and Daniel and Amanda and Jill, I could get that off of there, I think. Anyway, that was in Atlanta at Eddie's house, but Amy's holding Stephen there. It's a cute photo. Anyway, so Lynn
let's see them growing up.
Oh, yeah. So there's Stephen and Rachel and Addie, and they live in Albany, New York. And there's Brent and Lily and Jacob, and they live in Miami, which is another example. I mean, they are two Jewish growing families that live in bigger cities that are not the little places like Selma anymore. And they can have real Jewish lives there. And it's folks like this that we all do it for.
Indeed. And this is something that I really, when we were talking about putting this program together, and you sent me this picture, and tell the folks what you told me about the younger generation and being Jewish.
Well, where the Hanukkah, where the presents and the and the Hanukkah sign and all that is, that for years is the location of the Christmas tree in my house and in Selma. And I grew up, and my siblings, we did presents and Christmas trees, and we celebrated Christmas. And we did that with our kids. And these are some of my nieces and nephews here, Daniel, Amanda, Amy. And what happened was, me and my siblings, we stuck to our family traditions. As I said, we all came to Selma because, we couldn't leave because the store was there. So we met, and we were insistent on our family all being together. Nobody was cut any slack. We had to all be there. But the kids wanted to make the shift from the Christmas tree and Christmas to Hanukkah. So the traditions have actually gotten more traditional over the years, whether it's more conservative, but, we were not bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, but all of the kids, or most of the kids, are nowadays. And, and so things kind of go full circle.
Nice.
And Jews stay Jews. And, whether it's a little intermarriage or whatever, it really doesn't worry me. It seems like our bonds and our binds are still very tight in our tradition.
Indeed. And that kind of brings us to this I don't want to use the word demise, but maybe that is the right word, of the smaller Jewish communities in Selma here. This is already 23 years ago when there's a reunion story in the paper. And then, and this is the beautiful synagogue. This is Temple Mishkan Israel that's there. And there's a beautiful historical marker in front of it. But these are the last 4 Jews in Selma. And I believe, Rusty, you told me that one of these people has passed away.
Yeah, but the folks that are left there are, they are working with us closely to preserve the temple in Selma. And Ronnie Leet and Joni, who are there in the middle, and of course Hannah. Ronnie's kind of the leader of our efforts to preserve the temple. Suzanne can tell you, as though I really need another project, I am actively involved in the preservation of this gorgeous temple in Selma, which, so many people are surprised. They go to Selma on civil rights tours and they see this gorgeous synagogue, and it's like, wait a minute, there were Jews here? Well, yeah, this was a strong Jewish community, and we need that temple there to represent us.
Well, and absolutely, and that kind of brings us to the close of our formal program, although it hadn't been that formal. This is a rendering of the last part of our exhibit that you'll see when you come to the museum. It's called our State by State experience where you're going to be able to sit down. You'll want to sit down at this point because you'll have been standing a lot. So you'll sit on a stool, and you'll, on a touch screen, you'll be able to push a state that you want to explore more fully. And so if you were to explore Alabama, then these are some of the cities that you would be able to learn about the Jewish history of these cities. Now, not everyone's grandfather is going to be listed or mentioned, but we are a living museum, and so we continue to add to the stories that we tell, that we want to share. And so if we don't have your family story in the museum, who knows? There may be an opportunity, there may be a special exhibit at some point when we are actually able to talk about your family. Who knows? So I want to take a few minutes. We're at an hour now, and a lot of people, that's their limit for sitting on their tuchus. But for me, I could do it for 8 hours. So we do have a couple of folks in who gave questions in the chat. So I want to ask Rusty. Somebody asked, Rusty, was your father a Northerner accepted in Selma? And were there any issues with him becoming a Southerner? Doesn't, with all the fishing and with the worms, doesn't sound like it.
And he loved it. What he would tell us was that he enjoyed being a big fish in a little pond as opposed to what he would be in New York. You know, in New York, his parents owned a series of drugstores, and they lost them all except one in the Depression. And my grandfather even got robbed once, got shot, and lost an eye. So New York was a tough experience for him, but he, because of the business he was in, returned to New York 4 times a year on his buying trips. And one anecdote about that, when he would do that, as you know, there were no delis in Selma. We were lucky to have a restaurant, one barbecue restaurant. But my dad would take an empty suitcase with him to New York. And he'd go by, whether it was Katz's, he'd always go to Macy's basement because they had the great cookies. But he would load up an empty suitcase with smoked fish. I mean, imagine that on an airplane coming home, the smell of smoked fish for 4 or 5 hours. But we would have hard salamis and rye breads and the layer cookies and believe it or not, all of our buddies would know when my dad was getting back from New York because they would show up for the unpacking of the suitcase so they could get deli food. So yeah, my dad loved Selma, and my wife's gonna hate me for this, but I do tend to run on with these stories. One other food story from Selma, and that is growing up when I was the little guy without the shirt on. The way we would get our food in Selma, we really didn't have grocery stores. Every morning, you know, we had a cook, and I'd be eating breakfast in the kitchen with her, and we'd hear the bell outside and the clip-clop. There was a mule that would bring a wooden wagon by, and they would have whatever fresh vegetables that day they had grown. Our cook, it was usually Mary Phillips, who was African-American, about 4'6" and 220 pounds. She would take the pot she was going to cook the vegetables in, go out to the wagon, pick what she wanted, and the guy or the woman on the wagon would scoop up the okra or the lady peas or the black-eyed peas or the greens, scoop them into the pot. She'd tell them how much she wanted. And that's what we would eat that night. So it was fresh and it was good. And she'd generally put a piece of pig in there of some kind. We called it fatback, but it was pig fat. So we were Jewish, but boy, we ate well, and we ate like something.
So
Now she's mad at me again. So.
Jay Silverberg's asking about the Ullman family in Selma. He's wondering if they're related to the Ullman family in Birmingham. And I know a little bit about the Ullman family in Birmingham, but not the Ullman family in Selma. Is that a name that rings a bell with you in any way?
Len or Eddie, what about you guys? No? Eddie says no. Eddie knows every Jewish person that's ever passed through Selma. And if he says no, then no.
Well, so that's fine, no problem. And then Barbara is asking about the the Harmony Club. He said there used to be a Jewish club in Selma, the Harmony Club. Of course, now, after the decline of the population, things like that don't really exist anymore. But is the building still there? Do you know?
The building is still there. It is fabulous. I mentioned there's just some great, I'm a real estate and architecture guy. There's some fabulous buildings. This is a gorgeous building on Water Avenue, which is the old part of town, right on the river. And I think that, Eddie, you would remember this. Was it our grandparents that had their wedding reception there? I believe that's right. And they had a big ballroom upstairs. It's a gorgeous building, but it was the social hall for all the Jews. And yeah, there's a guy who's kind of an artsy guy who's bought it and renovated it, and with a bunch of funky stuff in it, and he'll give you tours. He's real proud of it, and it's terrific. It's fabulous.
Awesome. I want to, I'm going to share my screen one more time because it's got some important information on it. It's got two websites. It's one website, but two web pages. One is our support page, and it's a place you can go if you want to see this museum open, you want to see it succeed, you think it's important to share these stories about the South, about Jews, with the general public. Go to that page, make a contribution, make this your museum. The second website is to get in contact with me and my staff. Sign up for our newsletter at that site as well, and you can follow the progress of the museum. We're hoping to open sometime in early 2021. But the most important thing on this page is our tagline, Shalom, make yourself at home. This is really the kind of museum we want to be, not a stuffy, historical, dry, boring museum, but a place that's welcoming for everybody, Jews, non-Jews, Southerners, non-Southerners. We're telling an American story. We're talking about the American experience through our own stories. And there are lessons to be learned in those stories that we want to share with everybody. And we think now, more than ever, it's important to have those stories shared. So I thank you for joining us tonight. We will be putting this on our YouTube channel in the coming days, so you can watch it again and share it with your friends. And I hope to see you on our next show. Rusty, you want to say anything?
Yeah, thank you all for coming to Selma with me.
Thank you, Rusty, my man.
Excellent. Take care, everybody.
Keep shooting,
Thank
buddy.
you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Nice.
Excellent.